Welcome back to my channel. I'm Emerald the Quilter and I am making all of the quilts from the Perfect 5 Quilts book by It's So Emma. I am working on a quilt today in the 3 charm pack category, and this quilt is called Oatmeal Raisin Quilt. This quilt finishes at 64.5 inches squared, and I have the perfect fabrics picked out for summer. Let's get started. The Honey and Lavender charm packs are perfect for this oatmeal raisin quilt because there are 2 different sizes of squares. So when we look at these units, we see in color that there are some of the larger squares and they look on point, and then the smaller squares. I'm going to keep that in mind as I'm picking out my fabrics because I'm going to want some of the fabrics with the larger motifs to be inside of the center squares, and then those smaller ones can have smaller motifs. Now, it might not always work out that way, but it's what I'm going to be aiming for. Now, I have a total of 3 charm packs, and to make this quilt, you are going to need 98 charms total. And each charm pack has, in this, 42 squares. So I already know that if it is a large motif, like this one, I'm probably gonna wanna keep it in there. And let's zoom out just a little bit. That's the same one. This white one is definitely a no-no. This I think is too small, especially because, well, with this cream, I have a honeycomb background on cream print. These might be okay. So I'm looking to take out roughly 9. Like, I want to take this one out for sure. This is a total of 2, so 1, 2, 3, 4. This one might be okay, so I'll leave it in. But aren't those bees so cute? They're like a kaleidoscope image. Not so sure how I feel about that gingham. This gray would work, but I see that I mostly have a lot of color now, so I'm gonna go ahead and take that one out. This one is very pretty. Has words on it. What does it say? It says, when the flower is cut off, sweet as can be, kind words are like honey. Honey and flowers, you can be anything, be kind. Well, and then there's more, but very sweet little messages. I don't have the yardage for that particular print, so I don't know what else it says. This might have too much white. I'm not quite sure. I'm gonna leave it in, and I definitely want like all of these bright colors. So large yellow gingham, and we're going to be heading into repeat designs now. Oh, I love this one. I love this one. I really like how the fabric designer used the yellow and purple together. And I know yellow and purple always go, but I particularly like these shades. So this is the honeycomb on yellow, and then the inside of the honeycomb pattern. And of course, there's a lot more of lavender in this bundle. Large gingham, bees, kaleidoscope bees, lavender, honeycomb, and here is, oh, I think this might be one of my favorites. This is the large floral print on black. It's beautiful. And then the gingham, kaleidoscope, and almost done here. the honeycomb, and that one is right in the center. This one would be perfect to include in this large unit, one of those right there. See if I can remember it by the time I get there. Okay, try to scoot them over so you can see, and just two more. So here's the honeycomb pattern and another large floral print, and it is slightly different. I'll show them to you up close. There you go. All right, so I have the colors that I know for sure I want to keep. I'm going to open the other two packets and then keep all of my fabrics together so that I'm able to cut and decide which ones do I want to be large squares, which ones do I want them to be small squares, and of course I can't like always ensure that they are either small or large squares. So what I will do is make sure that most of them are going to be large squares as I organize them, and then of course, so that it's mixed up, have some that will be the small. So that's what I'm going to do, and I am going to cut my fabrics, cut these fabrics that are here in front of me while I set these off to the side, because all of the additional charm squares that we're not using, remember that we're going to make another scrappy quilt using this same book. And so that is coming up soon. Did I say I was going to keep this one? Yes, I did. It's right here. And I don't know why I put this one off to the side, but here it is. I think with this particular collection, I'm noticing fewer varieties and designs in the pattern designs than I've seen in other collections. That doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. I am just noticing that, and that might actually make it easier to spread everything out, because sometimes one design can overpower another one. Okay? And so you get the idea of what I'm doing. I am just making sure that they're all stacked together in the right places. And so of course I have a lot more to go through. I'll get them organized on the table, cut them, and then bring you back. I finished cutting out the larger A squares and the B squares. With this print here, with the honeycomb that I found and wanted to use it for one of the larger squares, I accidentally had cut it off to the side, and there were 3 of those that were going into this pile, but I remembered to make sure that the other 2 were centered. And I was able to accomplish that by using a 4.5-inch ruler, and I'm not going to worry about it because not all of these blocks have a centered motif, so I think it's going to be okay. I also have cut out my C rectangles and the D squares. And we're going to begin by making the square in a square unit here, which is why it looks like it's on point. And to do that, I have my diagonal seam tape. There's a couple different brands out there, and you can buy an off-brand that's pretty cheap, but I just go ahead and get the one that is by Cluck Cluck Sew because I find it to be very accurate. It's easy to like shimmy around on my sewing machine and it doesn't leave a residue. So I've got my stitch length set up to 1.85. You could use like a 2, but 1.85 is typically where I like to sew. And we're going to begin by taking the D squares and sewing them to the corners of the A's. My first A square is ready, and I'm going to start off with the honeycomb print that I really like on this charcoal black. And my red line on the diagonal seam tape is right in front of the needle, maybe about a 1/16 inch of away, and I'm making sure that the feed dogs are not touching the tape. So it's kind of hovering over it, and where I'm really pressing down is on this area of the machine and not so much along the silver area. you're going to match the corners of your 2 squares as normal. So here, and I'm going to be sewing from here down to here. I'm going to let this just get in under the foot, make sure that my corners are still matching, and I'm going to hold onto the bottom part of my fabric so that the corner continues to travel alongside the red line, right on top of it. And as you get comfortable with it, you'll be able to move much faster. I'm going to show you how I make 2 blocks today because the process is quite repetitive. This is what you would call a 1 block wonder quilt, and really all of the quilts in the Perfect 5 quilt book are all 1 block wonders, which is why they're so relaxing, I find, because once you know how to make the block, you don't need to go back to the pattern over and over again. Now, before I take this out, because I want to sew efficiently, I'm going to take 2 of my squares, my B squares, and sew them to 2 of my D squares. And I have a white on white honeycomb pattern. You can kind of see it there, which is why you see me flipping and turning it against the light to make sure I don't accidentally sew it on the wrong side. And I picked out the lavender honeycomb for one, and then the black gingham for the other. It would be helpful, especially if you don't have as much variety in prints as I do, just like I do, to kind of pick ahead of time which of your B squares you want to go with your square and a square in the center of the block. Now I'm going to grab 2 of these, 2 more D squares, and if you have directional prints, you're going to want to make sure that these are sewn correctly, because they're going to go directly on top of our point on point, our square and a square that looks on point unit. Now I'm going to sew the remainder B squares that I have, and there's 2 left, to my C rectangles. And my tape is kind of touching the feed dog, so I may have to move it back just a little bit, which is why you see me lifting the foot and slipping the fabric underneath. But since I'm just making 2 blocks for this video, it's not a big deal. So you see, this is a nice straight line. I'm going to repeat this process 3 more times. That's what it looks like when it's flipped over. And what do you know? We're going to have more cutaways again. And so I'll think of something fun to come up with these cutaways. I'm going to set these units aside. And with the B squares sewn to the rectangles, I need to add a D square right above. So I'm actually going to do that right now because I don't want to forget. We're going to sew this unit to the side of the block. Now that those are done, I'm going to add the other corners to the A square. And I'll probably cut them all off at the same time, but I'm going to make sure before I do that that they are not going to get in the way of the other 2 corners, because if they are, I'm going to have to cut them off right now. Let's see. So if I flip this back and I flip this one back, add my other D square. Yep. So you can see that it is actually on top of the folded over white background fabric, which means that I have to cut off my cutaways, press them, and I think I'm going to press them on the inside, especially because this is such a dark color fabric, and I'll be back to show you what it looks like. I've got the seams pressed towards the inside of the unit, and this kind of flipped, but that'll be okay. This is what it looks like on my lavender one, and it's just going to keep my darker fabrics from peering through this very light background, which is almost white. It's just got a tad bit of cream to it. And now I can continue. It would be very efficient to sew all of your square in a square blocks at the same time, and all your units that look like this all at the same time. You would want to keep them really like together. That way you can decide later on which pairings you're going to use. If I wasn't sewing on camera, that's how I would do it. I would just make one unit at one time, another unit at the, next. That's just typically what I do. Although sometimes when I get bored of sewing the same thing, then I'll move on to sewing a different unit or an entirely different quilt. So you know. Repeat the process one last time. Making sure, and I'm just tucking this, making sure it stays under there because that one had kind of got a little flipped. Adding a little bit of pressure, and there it goes. So now it's going to be sewn in the correct direction. This is the last seam, and I will be able to cut away these half square triangles and press them. Here's what it looks like. Here's the second one. And when I just finger press it open, isn't that so beautiful? I like that little happy bee. Ooh, and look at this. Very fancy, isn't it? Okay, I'm gonna trim these off and I'll be back. The square in the square is all pressed towards the inside. You can press your seams open if you would like, press to opposite sides. I'm going to do it this way just because I have this really dark color. And think about if you're going to send it to a long arm machines are much stronger than your domestic machines. So if you plan on quilting this yourself on a domestic machine, then you may want to press your seams open. I'm gonna send this one to a long armor, so she has a very strong machine, and 6 layers of fabric is not gonna be terrible. Now when I press this to my longer rectangular units, it's going to be pressed towards this unit and not towards these seams, because then that would be just a lot, right? So kind of think about what the plan is ahead of time. And I am going to press these to the dark. If you have a little dip, let's see, I had one, like here, you see it just kind of goes like, whee, like a slide. It's going to get eaten into your seam. It's okay, don't worry. What you want to do is make sure, and I guess I can go ahead and do this one first, make sure that you match up your corners and most of the edges, because where the seam or the edge of your unit tends to be different than the other piece of fabric is right there in the middle. And when I come in, you can see it's not entirely straight. See that right there? But if I sew it on top of this side straight, you will never know. And that is not even a 1/16 of an inch. I promise you, it will be fine. So I've learned that with some blocks, not all, that they're just not worth taking the time to square up. They're just not. If I trim any part of a block, it's almost always at the end. And that's only after I've made several other blocks, because if they're turning out the same size, it's okay. And that's really what's most important, that all of your blocks are the same. Woohoo! My point looks good. My point looks good. I could have sewed just a hair over. See? Just a hair. And I could try it again, but I'm going to press here, like that, and it feels real good. It doesn't feel super bumpy. It's not going to break the machine. I could probably, if I go slowly and carefully, I could probably even sew this on my domestic machine. So it's up to you, whatever you're comfortable with. At this point, I won't need to press again until the block is complete. So I did turn off my iron. I'm matching up the edges, and I am taking a glance at what's going on underneath there, but again, I'm really just making sure that the two corners and this edge is straight and not sort of in, not being pulled out this way. It's just straight. So whatever is crooked underneath is going to be completely hidden. And I am going to sew just a hair off to my left. You would call that a scant, and there is no real measurement of a scant, I've learned. So they're not particularly visible. So don't worry. Do what works for you. And I don't think I'm going to need pins for the next unit, but I did get them out. I do have a little bit of a longer distance to sew next. Pressing it outwards. Here's what it's looking like. Isn't that pretty? I really love this. Okay. Then, if I'm looking at it face up, I need to remember that my colored square is going to go down here. So, let's see. Am I going to need to pin this? Let me try. Without it. Because if I can ever sew without a pin, I will. And it is kind of a long distance, so I am going to pin it just right at the bottom. And it looks like there is a seam that I should match up. And I kind of feel it with my fingers. There it is. I'm checking this side. Remembering to sew just a scant. Just a scant. Making sure everything is aligned. And let's see. How did it turn out? Oh, it looks really good. It's perfect. Okay. Here, it did kind of go underneath. So I'm going to take this out because the fabric, it like bent in. Let me try again with another one. And it happened right there in the middle, and it probably has to do with the bulkiness. I'll show you. See if I can do a better job. It's going like this. Okay, got it under the needle. Checking this end. Pinning that. Matching these two seams, and I'm just holding them down so they don't move. Okay, and now I'm going to check this again. And I don't want my bottom to move, so I'm just adding a little bit more pressure than the first time. And now let's compare. This is the first long unit I sewed. There's significantly a lot more white in between the lavender and the point there. When we look at the back and I lift this up, you can see that more lavender is showing. And that shouldn't be the case if there was no dip in this particular seam. Let's compare it to this one. And you see this one is exactly perfect. So, you know, sometimes you do need to practice. And so I'm just gonna take this little bit out right here and fix it. And now that I know, I'll develop that muscle memory as I make more, especially if I'm chain piecing these. And I won't be making that mistake again. Or at least not too often. And if you're someone who rips seams out a lot, you may want to use a larger stitch length than I'm using. Okay, so I just ripped out about 1 inch. And I'm going to try that again. Making sure that this is matching, and it is. Adding more pressure. And I'm passing my stitches a little bit further than last time. I'm gonna go ahead and add this unit to this so I have a completed block. Just sewed that out of the way. Don't ever do that if you need to press your seams open, okay? So, matching my corners down here close to me. Matching the seam. Holding on to it. Okay, and then just watching the center area with all that bulk. Slowing down, and then I can speed up again. So here's the piece that I fixed. Oh, and it looks so much better. It's still just a little bit of white there, but it's probably a lot more than half. So I guess less than half of what there was. It's much better, much more even. I'm pleased with it. And there's just a little bit of thread that I need to take out from when I ripped the seam. Now it's nice and clean. And I have to add this last piece here before I show you what it looks like. Pin, nest my seams, line up my edges, okay, and slow down. Whoops, Make sure that seam does not fold back towards me. And then I can speed up again. And I have these pieces. Go ahead and sew them, okay? Don't lose them. We'll make something cute with them. Excuse me. Oh, doesn't that look so good? Here, it's just a little bit in, not by much. I'm gonna leave it like that because really, can you even tell from here? I don't think so. It's fine. This looks really good too. This one has a little bit of white here, but when I look, there isn't really, there's just this little indent here, tiny bit of black, but it's okay. It's not as noticeable as that very first one. And when you look at it from a distance, it looks really good. Let me press these open and I'll meet you back at the table. Here's the first block I finished with the cute little bee in the center. The points look great. When you look on the back, it's nice and organized. And these intersections right here are really not that bad at all. So it's okay if you want to press them the same way that I did. This is the ruler I mentioned earlier. I used to center this beehive. So I just found where I wanted my center to be and then I laid it on top. This is a very old method. There's all kinds of rulers that have some kind of center in them. This just so happens to be a June Taylor ruler that I've probably had maybe almost 15 years. In fact, it's like really nicked on the sides because it's very old. And I've put like some little sticky things on there to keep it from moving around because it was one that doesn't have enough friction. But it came out very cute, and I like this block because it's simple to make. There are not too many steps, and when you end up laying them side by side, if you press to the dark and you flip it over, you'll see that you have two seams to nest right there. So it works out perfectly. I hope you enjoyed making these two quilt blocks with me. They're actually really easy to make and they're so cute. There they are again. You're going to need a total of 49 to make this quilt. The finishing size of this quilt is actually a really good size. It finishes right at 64.5 by 64.5, and really you could just keep going and make this quilt larger if you wanted to. Change out the background so it's not so white. And I love that the honeycomb on here kind of helped with that. This is probably gonna take me about maybe another 2 weeks to finish all of them just because I have so many quilts that I'm working on. But I can't wait to see you next time. Have a wonderful summer and I'll see you soon. Bye.